everybody. So my name is McKenna Davey, and I'm in the group for conduct disorders. And so my article is called "Which Kindergarten Children Are at Greatest Risk for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity and Conduct Disorder Symptomology as Adolescents." So basically what this title is just trying to tell us is that it's looking at kindergarten children and trying to assess which of them are at greatest risk for developing ADHD comorbid with conduct disorder later in life, so in puberty or as adolescents. Because the problem with ADHD and conduct disorder is that once it is established, it is hard to treat. And so the best way to prevent this from happening is to have early intervention and early screening measures. So that's what this article is aimed. So just to get into it, we're going to talk about some of the risk factors that they were looking at. So just to quote the article so that we all know what risk factors they were going in on. It says, quote, "Kindergarten children from low SES households, so low socioeconomic status households, were at greater risk, as well as those raised by mothers with depressive symptoms or experiencing emotional problems or substance abuse. Or those who were punished by spanking were severely or significantly more likely to display severe levels of ADHD with conduct disorder." So this article, it aimed to identify possible early indicators of a future disorder in ADHD and conduct disorder. So to do this, they followed approximately 7,456 children from kindergarten to 8th grade. So they used past research studies to figure out what risk factors to look for. So they looked at older research studies that have already been done that looked at ADHD and conduct disorder to figure out what kind of questions they were going to ask. Study, they used risk factors for ADHD and conduct disorders respectively, not together, because no study had done that yet. So like I said earlier, they're trying to create these early screening measures for the disorder in order to prevent or at least lessen the chances of the disorder becoming so severe. Children with ADHD and CD sadly face a lot of problems in school because these are two very disruptive disorders. They're also more likely to be rejected by their peers, and so they're likely to have antisocial personality traits that go beyond adolescence. So this can actually predict future criminal behavior. So obviously, this is something very important to study so that we can lessen the amount of crime occurring, especially from these children, right? So since it was a longitudinal study, obviously, because it assessed these children, like almost 8,000 children from kindergarten to 8th grade. It was also quantitative and empirical. So it also used parent and teacher surveys. That's how we know that it's quantitative. So you'd ask questions that would pertain to the child's behavior, and these children ended up being split into 3 groups. So there was one group that had no ADHD or conduct disorder symptoms. There was another group that had moderate ADHD conduct disorder symptoms, and a third group that had severe ADHD and conduct disorder symptoms. So you can probably assume, and this is correct, that the children without it were the largest group, the children with moderate were the second largest, and the children with the most severe were the smallest group. What they also did to ensure that they could get rid of some bias in this study was they had great diversity in the children's backgrounds. Since they looked at 7,400 some children, they had a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different people from different socioeconomic status households. So it really helped there. And then they also had both teachers and parents observe and survey the behavior. So that also created 2 different environments where these children were being studied in. They were asking questions in the surveys. They used the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for each. So they weren't just like pulling questions out of the air that they thought would relate to conduct disorder or ADHD symptomology. They were using a universal diagnostic criteria to actually get their results. So it also made it more, since it was a longitudinal study, the article took quite a developmental perspective. They were looking at children through each stage of life, obviously seeing if they were developing typically or atypically throughout, and that's kind of like the approach that our textbook uses as well. So that was kind of nice to see. But some critiques for this is that obviously they only followed the children to 8th grade. So who knows if they turned out to be adults that did have criminal behavior? Like, were their preventative measures good? Like, we don't really know that. So obviously following them for longer would have been more helpful just to see what they kind of turned into as adults and if they did have this criminal behavior. The survey was not designed to diagnose ADHD and CD. Yes, they used the DSM as a backbone, but it was not designed to diagnose anybody. So therefore, they were unable to state definitively if these children actually had the disorder. But they tried to overcome this by basing their questions from the DSM-5. So, they did their best. And for the first study, I think it's pretty good. So, admit that the symptomology of oppositional defiant disorder shares much of the same criteria as ADHD and CD. But they still feel, obviously, it is valid symptomology and it's good research. The study did not include a formal measure of IQ, even though they said that one of the risk factors was doing poorly in school. Really good job at conducting their research. Their hypothesis was mostly correct, and their goal was to better equip school psychologists to help these children. So I think that they were really helping with this, and obviously more research just needs to be done. So identifying risk factors for disorders is one of the most valuable forms of primary intervention. And this article just shows that by gaining insight into the symptomology of disorders, it benefits everyone, children, parents, and teachers. Because really what we're just trying to do is help these children and understand their disorder and understand where they're coming from.